This video is going to go over Part E of the Google Sheets activity on scatter plots, and we'll be looking at how to make scatter plots with more than one variable, so multiple scatter plots. So you'd have two different values of y for the same value of x. So we're going to use the marks sheet here to complete the following. The data in the sheet shows the Unit 1 test mark on counting, and the midterm report card mark, and the final report card mark for a data management class. We're going to examine the relationship between the Unit 1 mark and the midterm mark, as well as the relationship between the Unit 1 mark and the final mark. So when you make a multiple scatter plot, the x value is always the same, and you have two different y values that each would have a relationship with the x value. So one independent variable, two different dependent variables. So to make a multiple scatter plot, you're going to highlight all three columns, or just highlight all the data. You're going to create a scatter plot, and yippee, it's thinking it's smart, so it's already making the multiple scatter plot here. It's already making two different colors, which is great. So all of the blue dots represent the midterm mark. All of the red dots represent the final mark. And we're going to format it. So under the Customize tab, we're going to do the following. So we're going to title it. So you can see here, midterm mark and final mark versus Unit 1 mark. So remember, it's always the dependent versus the independent. So midterm mark and final mark versus the Unit 1 mark. Our x-axis needs a unit, and the unit is going to be %. And the y-axis. Now, because there's two different things, there's a midterm mark and a final mark, we could just call it here report card mark. And the unit is %. Now we'll place the legend on the right side. So legend will go over to the right, and you can see it over here now. In the series menu, it's going to say apply to all series. What we want to first do is change it to say midterm mark. So anything we change here will just change the blue dots for the midterm. So what you can do is you can change the color, the point size, the point shape as desired. So there's lots of different colors you can choose. You could put one of them on the left axis and one of them on the right axis. And you could change this to a star. If we wanted to, we could put it over on the right axis. And then we could label on this side final mark, and then over here midterm mark. But we don't need to in this case because we could just call it report card mark. And so let's put that back over to the left. And we're going to create a linear trend line. So trend line, and make sure it says linear. We'll just leave the color alone. Under label, we're going to say equation. Now we're going to go back up to where we said apply to, and now we're going to change it to final mark. And you can do all the same thing for final mark. Change the color, change the axis, we can change the shape, maybe we want it to be a square. We're going to add a trend line, make it linear, and the label is going to be equation. So now over here it's got a legend and it's got the equations. Remember, it just doesn't show the y equals, but if you were to write it down on paper, you need to write the y equals. Now the last thing is you want to remember that for good communication, the graph should take up at least 2/3 of the graph. This is really only kind of taking up half the graph. So you've got some wasted space down here that we're going to get rid of. So you may have to change the min and or the max values of the x and or the y. So what we're going to do is to get rid of this wasted space. If you take a look, this point goes a little bit below 50. So what we're going to do is change the y min to be 40. And you do that under vertical axis. And you're going to change the min to 40. And now the graph takes up more of the grid and there's no wasted space. So this is a multi-variable scatter plot, which means there's more than one variable on the y-axis. You can't have it so that there's more than one on the x-axis. Now in cell F1, calculate the correlation coefficient between the midterm mark and the unit 1 mark. So here, let's just move this out of the way. So that's going to be equals correl, and this is the unit 1 and midterm. So it's the y values, which is midterm, and then comma the x values, which is the unit 1 mark, and the correlation coefficient is 0.851-ish. And now in cell F4, we're going to calculate the correlation coefficient between the final mark and the unit 1 mark. So we're going to do the same thing, but now we're going to do it with the final mark. And what this shows you is that there is a higher correlation between the unit 1 mark and the midterm mark than there is with the unit 1 mark and the final mark. And that could be that the midterm mark is usually just units 1 and 2, and they're very similar topics, and the final mark has all of the units, so it doesn't have as much of a relationship with the unit 1. You can see here that the final mark, you've got some points further away. Maybe they're outliers, so you'd have to check using the outlier formula. But something else that's worth noting is that the final marks all seem higher than the midterm marks. So you could see here, whatever your midterm mark is, it's very likely that your final mark is going to be higher than what your midterm mark is, except for a couple of cases over here. All right, and so that concludes everything we need to know about scatter plots.